The technology world, I know, Steve, is a very different world, but I think in a variation of your book, I mean, you could just as easily argue in a lot of your chapters where you talk about of whom much is given, you know, much is expected back. And I was thinking of the Facebook situation in light of this. Steve Stevens, who apparently went live on Facebook, killed someone,
right.
And it was quite a while, hours before that was taken down. Do you think Facebook and other technology companies have an obligation to more aggressively police that sort of thing? Because it keeps happening.
No, of course. And even when we started AOL 30 years ago, we said there's some positives of the internet, leveling the playing field, giving people access to information, giving everybody a voice. But there's also some negatives. Back then, it was things like the digital divide and making sure the internet was safe for kids, privacy, things like that. Now, because the internet is so part of everyday life and it's used by most people as the primary way they are getting news, you need to take a fresh look at it, including things like fake news. And now that things like Facebook Live, which is a terrific resource that allows people to broadcast things, most of which is positive, some of which is going to be negative or highly problematic. And of course, the companies, once they establish this leadership position, do have a responsibility to society to make sure their platforms, these technologies, are used in
positive. But you buy the argument that, you know, it's so big and we have so many customers, over 1 billion, we can't police everything that's going on. There's got to be.
Well, of course you can't police everything that's going on, but there are ways to have alert systems and be able to deal with things in a prompter fashion. I'm sure they're looking at that, and I applaud that.
When you look at technology, and you know, when Netflix came out with better than expected numbers, many were saying it's going to lead to a parade of strong technology earnings, you know, that still might pan out. Little evidence of that so far today. But do you buy that the technology is going to continue to be the market leader?
Well, really the theme of the third wave is not just about technology in some ways, everybody's a tech company. It's how the technology gets embedded in our lives and changes healthcare, changes education, changes food and agriculture. Those are going to be the big themes in the third wave. And there's going to be a lot of disruptors, just as there were in the first wave and the second wave. There'll be disruptors in the third wave.
And some of those big survivors. You always hear in this environment, it'll be a Facebook, a Google, an Apple. Those three names keep coming up. I'm sure.
All three of those are extremely well positioned. I think we'll continue to do well. I'm just reminded, and it's more about some of the personal stories I try to talk about in the book, that 20 years ago there was a cover of Fortune magazine with a picture of me and Bill Gates and said, who's going to win the battle for the internet? And the answer was none of the above. That while Microsoft did well and AOL did well, now Google and Facebook, which didn't exist at the time that article was written, emerged as leaders.
And everyone thought Prodigy was
back then, Prodigy, backed by $1 billion from IBM and Sears and CBS, they ended up kind of falling by the wayside. So what's going to happen in the third wave, some of the small companies will end up being big companies. The smart, agile big companies will partner with the entrepreneurs to figure out a way to navigate through this third wave. And partnership is going to be a big theme of the third wave. It's not just about the software anymore. It's not just about the app. It's not just about coding. It's about how you integrate that and partner with hospitals, or in case of healthcare, or universities in the case of education.
I mean, you touched on it, but what role should the government play in this? Because some people worry you don't want to be too strong there. But by the same token, many in your industry have argued you can help us a lot by just kind of getting out of our way.
It's a mix. It's a mix. And even things like one of the things I hope the president is looking at is the Jobs Act that passed 5 years ago allow you to use the internet to raise capital for startups, what's called crowdfunding. But the rules the SEC put in place were 800 pages, a little too complicated. How do you simplify that so actually good things can happen? The role of regulators.
So you welcome what he's doing on the regulatory.
I think that aspect would be helpful.
Right.
In the third wave, these industries are really important. You know, things like healthcare. How do you strike the balance in keeping bad things from happening? Of course, we don't want drugs that are going to kill people, or medical devices don't work, or things like that. But not just focus on the negatives, also focus on the positive, unleashing the innovation we saw in the first and second waves because of the internet, which was created by the government. Actually, DARPA funded it 50 years ago, and then the government broke up Ma Bell to really create competition in communication. The Congress passed the Telecom Act. And remember, it was only until 1992 it was even legal for consumers or businesses to connect the internet. Initially, it was restricted to government use in education. So the government did it pretty well in those early days of the internet. How do we do that pretty well in the next wave, this third wave, and striking that right balance, but a bias towards a lighter touch so more innovation can flourish?
Are you for tax cuts?
And for tax simplification, absolutely. I mean, things are way too complicated, and I think we need a fresh look at it.
What if we don't get that?
Well, maybe it'll happen in increments. I think one of the areas that really needs attention, I talk about it in the book, is how do you create the tax incentives to back the entrepreneurs in the middle of the country, in these rise-to-rest cities where it is harder to raise capital. There's a proposal right now, a bipartisan bill called the Investing in Opportunity Act, introduced by Tim Scott and Cory Booker, that creates some deferrals of capital gains if you invest in these up-and-coming regions. So I think we have to have a bias on tax reform, not just to simplify it, but to have the right incentives focused on job creation all across the country so that people who do feel left out and left behind have a real chance in the third wave.
All right. Steve Case, the third wave, you notice how seamlessly he brought that in to every single question I had, which is brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant.
Thank you, sir.
Well, anything I can do. All right.